days, and you were right, she was fighting to the end, but she's at such peace, and she looks so regal and so beautiful, and so well done. As someone said earlier, you know, you're flooded with memories and thoughts and funny things and challenging things, a whole swirl of things. And when Ada texted this morning, you said, would you get up and say something? I said, I would be honored. But then, you know, when the moment arrives, you just don't know what are you going to say. There's so many things to pull from. So is it pastor or reverend? Pastor? Either? Deacon? Deacon. When you were speaking and when Jude's brother was speaking, you were talking about her inquisitiveness and asking questions and wanting to, you know, probe. And what I was thinking is, where I grew up, we would say, Jude would get in your business. Jude would get in your business. But you're right, it was always from a place of trying to learn more, know more, understand more. And depending on where that conversation went and what you shared, she was then ready to offer you her wealth of knowledge, her contacts, her experience, her support, just to listen. So it wasn't just that she was asking for the sake of asking. You always think that there's going to be more time. When we saw Jude, Rhonda Hogenbach and I went to see her, and I think that was during the summer when she was having one of her first treatments, and she was alert and awake, and you know, you could tell she had, you know, she had been through some stuff, but she still had that booming voice, and she said, ladies, I don't know if I'm going to make it through this one. And you know, we said what you always would say, right? Of course, girl, you got this. You know, you're a fighter, you've got it. But when we left, we said, wow, we've never heard Jude speak like that before. But she did make it through. She rallied, and she would go on to rally through many, many more times, right? So a week or so ago, when we got yet another call that, you know, things were a little bit more challenging, and you went to see her, and yes, she was fighting, and she was fighting. And you'd say, well, she's going to make it through again. But that wasn't going to be the case this time. Jude was a friend, a colleague, a mentor, a fighter. She rallied at all the things that you talked about. Whenever you come to a going home service, you learn so many little things, much of what you knew, but you see a different shade of it. So, you know, she talked about going from the South, but you gave much more texture to those stories, and it makes perfect sense when you realize the woman that we encountered at the MTA, who I saw her during her second tour. At Transit, we often refer to it in military terms because it's a military clock, right? Or doing time, another employer. But I met her at that second tour, and I was sharing with Carmen Soardi when I was leaving Beth Israel, which was my first time being on the management side. I grew up on the labor side, both in terms of my family and heritage and the work I used to do. And she said, well, you're going to meet a friend of mine. She's coming back there. Her name was Judy Pierce, you know. And so that was 2002, and Jude immediately became, she made herself our mentor, right? Myself, by Musa, Kamara, who was here earlier, Myra Bell, she took it upon herself to kind of rally us in, and she'd start to ask you questions. Where did you go to school? What were your interests? And on and on and on. You know, Transit was like a mill in terms of cases at that time. I mean, you started early in the morning, you had your caseloads, and sometimes you really didn't even get a chance to have lunch. That downtime, you were trying to catch up on cases, but Jude made you, you know, pay attention. And it was always from the perspective of, what's your next step? What's your goal? You know, well, you know, if that job opportunity elsewhere, is it going to be a manager position? I said, well, I'm a manager here. She said, oh, no. They call everybody here a manager, but you're not a manager until you've managed people. The first transition I made, I was pretty happy. I had my friends, you know, you did your thing. And this opportunity comes up, and she was one of those people that you keep close counsel. That's so important. I tell that whenever you talk to young people, you have to have someone that you can keep close counsel. If you told Jude something, it stayed right there. So when this opportunity presented itself, I spoke to her about it, and she said, well, you know, if they're going to give you a chance to manage people, you really need to think about it. And I did. And that laid the path for when she miraculously ascends to become the vice president of labor relations at New York City Transit. And she called me to meet her at City Hall Park, and said some things were going to be happening, and she was putting together her team. And I'm looking, oh, well, that's great. Who's in your team? And she says, well, I want you to come back and work, you know, with me. And she didn't even know what that was going to be. It was just like she was putting together pieces. And so when I tell you that we had similar personalities, we both had bad knees, we had a lot of things in common, but she was fierce and fearless. and she pushed you. She pushed you to be more than you thought or you could see at that time that you could be. And so when we would have battles, and Rhonda was probably witness to many of them because we both would hold our ground. And I was raised by my dad, a single parent, and lost my mother when she was 10, when I was 10 to breast cancer. So I was pretty tough too. And we had that in common, but she respected the fight. She respected that you told her what you thought. She respected that you fought back and you fought for your position. And then afterwards, you'd go down huffing and puffing, and she'd say, "Did you eat lunch?" I'm not trying to think about having no doggone lunch. I'm still upset with you. Lunch. And she said, "Well, come on upstairs and share my lunch with me, or have some soup, And then we talk it through. We talk through what your differences were. And sometimes she'd get you to see, a different way. And sometimes you'd get her to see your perspective. And sometimes you'd agree to disagree, and that was okay. So, I can't say enough about her and the circle that she put me in, the people who would become her kitchen cabinet. That was a phrase that she used that I had never heard of. Myself, Valentino Castor, Rhonda Hogenbach. And then there were people who were also right in the kitchen. John Chrissy, who's here, Michael Dino. And we all held each other down because it was tough working for Jude. She did not suffer fools lightly. The first time she gave us an assignment, me and Rhonda, to write something, it wasn't a big deal, but it was going to the agency president, and that's who she reported to. And we obsessed, because, it's like you were sending the tablets up, And she had worked for him. He had been there at Trans before. She worked for him in SEPTA. So we said, we'll call her, because she knows his voice, right? She'll kind of... And man, we called her. It was about 7:30, 8 o'clock at night. She said, "Figure it out." Figure it out. Let me tell you, that was the best advice I had ever been given, because you know what? We did figure it out, and we set up a quality product. And that's the kind of thing that it forced you, that if I came to ask a question, it was going to be worthy for me to bring it to you to ask a question. It was not that there was, anything as a stupid question, but she forced you to think and to use what she saw in you, that she felt you had the capacity to figure it out. Two last things. This morning I had a chance to speak to Councilman Danique Miller. And before Danique was councilman in Queens, he was president of ATU 1056, one of the locals, formidable union. And he heard about Jude's passing. I wanted to make, you start to think of all the people, that you have to reach out and do they know, and they'll be upset if you didn't let them know. And he knew. We talked in the car, and he said, "Oh man, I'm gonna miss Jude. She was very special to me." He said, people always think that you're on the union side and the management side, and that you're always fighting, and that you have, you don't come together. He says, "But that's just not true." He said, "I learned so much from her through the years." And when she retired and he moved on to run for council, he said, we still got together and we have lunch or sushi in places over in Park Slope, and I pick her brain and she'd help me strategize. And then you flip to the other side. I reached out to Tom Prendergast. Tom Prendergast was the former president of New York City Transit years ago. He was president of Long Island Railroad. He came back to be chairman and MTA CEO and chairman. And Jude worked for him her last tour at the TA. And he said, he says, "I didn't know her as well as you did." He says, "But I will tell you, I came to like her very much, in that she always put everything into something that she was working on." He said, "And you always knew that below that grit and that rough exterior, that she was warm, and she was thoughtful, and she was caring." And then he said, when you look at the time that she came up, with the gender discrimination that was taking place, particularly inside transit, and how she went toe-to-toe, and this was his words, with the old white Irish guard in OA and the bus operator divisions 20, 30 years ago, and how she held her ground, and how she never let the pressure get to her. That's what he remembered. So that was two opposite sides, right, of the spectrum that were looking back and thinking about the life that this woman led. The last thing I'd say is that I'm thankful. I'm thankful that before she became ill, and I guess it was maybe 5 years ago, 4 or 5 years after she retired, our relationship changed, right? Because now she'd see something crazy in the paper about what was happening, and she said, "What's going on?" And, da-da-da-da-da, "Can I help you? And are you okay? Are you okay? Will you be all right? Will Rhonda be all right? What's happening? Can I help you? Here's who you can call. Here's who you can strategize with." And so at that point, I remember saying, you've gone through a few losses at this point at the season in all of our lives, and you know that you may not get a chance again, to thank somebody. You don't want it to be today. So I'm thankful that in that call, I was sitting in my car, riding around in Brooklyn, looking for a parking spot, as I was always having to do. And I said, Jude, I just want to let you know the lessons that you gave me, the push that you gave me, the fight that you showed me, it's paying off now. Because as you said, when you left, you were going to put so many of us there that couldn't get rid of all of us. And I've tried to pay it back in ways big and small for those who have been in my sphere, whether it's a conversation or a reference or what have you. And so I had a chance to tell her that, and for that I'm thankful. So rest well, Queen, until we meet again.